Eamon Collins was in Newry on the morning of Sunday the 9th of May 1987. What he learned confirmed what he had already begun to suspect. 8 men had been killed the previous evening in the village of Loughgall, County Armagh. British soldiers. An RUC station. A bomb. The scale of the loss, the largest single loss the Provisional IRA would suffer between 1921 and the Good Friday Agreement, was enough to stop most people where they stood. Collins wasn't most people. He had worked with these men. He had moved in the same intelligence circles, handled the same networks, watched the same targets. He was an IRA intelligence officer based in Newry, and by the time the BBC's lunchtime bulletin had confirmed the names, he had understood 3 things he had not understood the previous morning. The British had known. The British had known for months, and the British had watched his people travel all the way to the station gates before they opened fire. He sat and worked through what that implied about the penetration of the organisation he served. He worked through what it implied about his own position. He was right about most of it. Collins would later set down his account of these years in Killing Rage, published by Granta Books in 1997. The book described, in prose that resists sentimentality throughout, the mechanics of IRA intelligence work in South Armagh and across the border areas. The targeting, the surveillance, the authorizations, the faces of the men he helped to direct. He wasn't at Loughgall. That distinction matters and will be maintained throughout this account. His knowledge of the 8 men who died there, and his later understanding of what their deaths proved about British capability, gave him an analytical clarity about the ambush that few people on either side ever achieved. He survived the ceasefire. He gave evidence in court against former comrades. He was bludgeoned and stabbed to death on a country lane outside Newry in January 1999. This is the story he never got to hear told correctly. The East Tyrone Brigade of the Provisional Irish Republican Army wasn't, by the mid-1980s, an improvised collection of rural gunmen operating on instinct and available weaponry. It was the most operationally effective IRA unit in the province. It had a coherent doctrine, and it had been executing that doctrine with consistent success for 2 years before Loughgall. The doctrine was Jim Liner's. Liner was born on the Tully estate in Monaghan Town on the 13th of April 1956, one of 12 children, and had joined the IRA in the early 1970s. He spent 5 years in the Maze prison after being badly injured in a premature bomb explosion in December 1973, and used the time, by multiple accounts, to study Mao Zedong seriously. After his release in 1979, he was elected as a Sinn Féin councillor for Monaghan Urban District Council, a post he held when he died. The RUC, who had interrogated him many times and charged him with nothing that stuck, knew him by the nickname the Executioner. His theory was structural. Destroy isolated rural police stations, prevent the authorities from rebuilding them by targeting contractors, and expand the territory the British couldn't patrol without risk. Create liberated zones, beginning in East Tyrone, and gradually extend them. Jim Liner believed he was applying lessons from a successful anti-colonial guerrilla campaign to a new theatre. IRA Northern Command approved a scaled-down version of his plan. What remained was still ambitious. From 1985 onward, journalist Kevin Toulis would later write, "The East Tyrone Brigade led a 5-year campaign that left 33 security facilities destroyed and nearly 100 seriously damaged." Patrick Joseph Kelly, born March 19, 1957, Brigade Commander from 1985, translated Liner's strategic theory into operational practice. Kelly was the man who planned the attacks, assembled the units, and led them. Alongside McKerney, who had escaped from the maze in September 1983 in the famous mass breakout, and the wider East Tyrone network, he ran an organisation that Mark Urban would later describe in Big Boy's Rules as the producing unit for the IRA's most dramatic operations in the mid-1980s. Declassified documents from the National Archives of Ireland, released in 2017, confirmed the scale of what the East Tyrone Brigade had built. The weapons recovered from the 8 dead at Loughgall were linked by ballistic testing to 40 to 50 killings, including every security force fatality in counties Fermanagh and Tyrone in 1987 before the attack. The Ruger Security 6 revolver found on the Loughgall site had been taken from the body of Reserve Constable William Clements at Ballygawley on the night he was killed 18 months earlier. These men weren't carrying unrelated hardware. They were carrying the accumulated forensic record of their unit's entire recent campaign. The attack on Ballygawley came first. On Saturday, the 7th of December 1985, at 18:55, Patrick Kelly led 2 active service units to the RUC barracks in Ballygawley, County Tyrone, an armed assault unit and a bomb unit. As the officers on duty prepared for the shift change, 2 gunmen stepped out of concealed positions at the entrance and shot both guards at close range. Reserve Constable William Clements, aged 52, and Constable George Gilliland, aged 34. Both died at the entrance to their own station. The building was raked with automatic fire, the bomb placed inside, and upon detonation, the base was destroyed. 3 officers who had run out the rear survived. Constable Clements' revolver was taken from his body before the unit withdrew. 8 months later came the Birches. On the 11th of August 1986, East Tyrone struck the RUC base at the Birches near Portadown, County Armagh. The station was unmanned. The unit first raked it with automatic gunfire. Then Declan Arthurs, a volunteer from Galbally, County Tyrone, who had learned to operate construction machinery on his family's farm, drove a stolen JCB backhoe loader through the perimeter fence. In the bucket, a 200-pound bomb wired to a fuse. The blast destroyed most of the base and damaged nearby buildings. 3 civilians were slightly injured. The unit escaped before the roadblocks that went up minutes too late could close around them. Mark Urban called the Ballygawley and Birches operations spectaculars. Both achieved every primary objective. Both units escaped without casualties. The JCB and van doctrine had a 2-match winning record. The playbook worked. So when Patrick Kelly and Jim Liner began planning the 3rd attack in the sequence, a strike on Loughgall RUC station in County Armagh, they had no operational reason to doubt it would work again. They had a proven methodology, proven personnel, and at least one advantage their previous targets had not offered. Some of the same men who had attacked the first 2 stations were available for the 3rd. McKerney, Arthurs, Liner himself, men who had done this before and walked away. There was one difference at Loughgall the Brigade's planning had to account for. The station wasn't unmanned. 3 local RUC officers worked there part-time, the station open from 9 to 11 in the morning and 5 to 7 in the evening. The plan was to attack at the close of the evening shift, the moment the officers might be expected to emerge. The brigade intended to kill them as they came out. That is the finding of subsequent European Court of Human Rights proceedings, and it isn't disputed in any credible account. The plan took weeks to assemble and was the most elaborate operation the East Tyrone Brigade had mounted. 2 vehicles, a stolen backhoe loader, a bomb of 300 to 400 pounds of explosive packed inside an oil drum, partially concealed by rubble, wired to 2 40-second fuses. The Semtex and bomb components were transported by boat across Lough Neagh from Ardbow to Maharay to bypass the vehicle checkpoints on the roads. Even the logistics of moving the device were planned to defeat the standard interdiction methods. The vehicles were hijacked in the hours immediately before the attack. A blue Toyota Hi-Ace van was taken by masked men from a business in Dungannon. Jim Liner was spotted in Dungannon at roughly the same time, a detail that would later allow investigators to connect the vehicle theft to the operation's command structure. The digger, another backhoe loader, was taken from a farm on Lislesley Road, about 2 miles west of Loughgall. 2 IRA members stayed at the farm under guard to prevent the owners from raising an alarm. The vehicle theft and the securing of the farm were timed to give the attack team its window. The 8-man assault unit divided for the approach. Declan Arthurs would drive the digger. Gerard O'Callaghan and Tony Gormley, aged 28 and 24 respectively, would ride with him, weapons in hand, in what journalist Peter Taylor described as literally riding shotgun. The remaining 5 would travel in the Toyota van. Eugene Kelly, aged 25, driving, Patrick Kelly, the 30-year-old brigade commander, in the passenger seat, with Jim Liner, aged 31, Padraig McKerney, aged 32, and Seamus Donnelly, aged 19, in the rear. 8 men. Between them, they had been involved in virtually every significant IRA operation in East Tyrone since 1985. McKerney had been in the Maze breakout. Liner had devised the doctrine they were all now executing. Arthurs had driven the digger at the Birches. These were the most capable operators the brigade had. Separate scout cars operated on the outer approaches, carrying 3 further members of the unit who would screen the flanks and serve as rear cover. What none of the 8 knew, what Eamon Collins, sitting in Newry on the morning of the 9th, slowly worked out from the scale of the intelligence failure, was that the British security forces had known about the planned attack for weeks, and had known the specific target for at least 10 days before the operation launched. The Tasking and Coordinating Group South, TCG South, operated out of Gough Barracks, Armagh. Its function was specific. Take intelligence from multiple sources across RUC Special Branch, Military Intelligence and MI5, and convert that intelligence into operational direction for security forces in the field. It directed police and soldiers in the undercover war along the border from South Down to West Fermanagh. In 1987, TCG South was commanded by Detective Superintendent Ronnie Flanagan, who would later serve as RUC Chief Constable from 1996 to 2002. One subsequent inquiry described TCG South as the hidden hand behind the Loughgall ambush, and that characterisation hasn't been seriously contested. The precise origin of the intelligence that enabled the ambush remains disputed in the open literature, and the script won't resolve what the official record hasn't resolved. Multiple accounts agree on the timeline in broad terms. The British security forces received actionable intelligence about a planned IRA attack on an RUC station weeks before the 8th of May, and knew the specific target, Loughgall, at least 10 days in advance. One published account, in Agents of Influence, records a branch handler receiving information from a source on April 30th, 1987, 9 days before the attack. On the question of how the intelligence was obtained, 3 distinct theories appear in the academic and journalistic literature. The first is a human source, an informant inside the East Tyrone Brigade or its support network, whose identity has never been officially confirmed. The second is signals intelligence or telephone intercepts with no human agent inside the unit. The third is a convergence of methods, surveillance, signals, and possibly a source at a higher level of the Republican movement, feeding information down a separate channel. What isn't in dispute is that the RUC learned, through some combination of these means, that a mechanical digger had been stolen in the area in early May 1987. When a covert observation post monitoring the stolen digger reported it was being moved on the evening of the 8th, the SAS was already positioned and waiting. Richard English, historian and former professor at Queen's University Belfast, has written that the specific intelligence didn't come from within the 8-man assault unit itself, though he notes that one member, Tony Gormley, was known to Special Branch as a paid informant. Whether Gormley's knowledge of the Loughgall operation was ever communicated to his handlers remains unestablished. Some open-source accounts have alleged that the informant, if there was one inside the operational team, was killed in the ambush, and that the search for him afterwards was therefore fruitless. The IRA's own internal investigation never produced a definitive conclusion. It's possible the intelligence came entirely from technical means, and that no human agent was ever involved. The phrase that belongs in this script, and the only phrase that is defensible against the available evidence, is this: the British had a high-placed source whose identity has never been officially confirmed. Whatever the origin of the intelligence, the operational response was methodical. A team from 22 SAS Regiment was dispatched to Loughgall. The 3 local RUC officers were quietly removed and replaced by 2 headquarters mobile support unit officers and 1 uniformed constable, maintaining the appearance of normal station activity. 6 SAS soldiers in plain clothes, including their commander, positioned themselves inside the building. 18 further SAS soldiers in uniform were hidden in 5 locations in the wooded areas surrounding the station. The station faced a football pitch. Along the road opposite, concealed among fir trees, soldiers strung detonating cord, a device that would explode immediately before the ambush was triggered, creating noise and distraction at the precise moment the IRA unit began its attack. Cut-off groups were positioned at either end of the stretch of Ballygazy Road to seal escape routes. Within the 2 main outer positions, soldiers carried L7A2 general-purpose machine guns, belt-fed weapons capable of discharging several hundred rounds per minute. The inner positions and the teams inside the station were armed with M16 and Heckler & Koch G3 rifles. Every vehicle, every route, every timing, every tactic the brigade had rehearsed over 18 months had been anticipated. The East Tyrone Brigade was walking into an ambush its own success had made possible. The doctrine had worked at Ballygawley and the Birches. It had been studied, mapped, and pre-positioned against. The unit arrived in Loughgall from the northeast shortly after 7 in the evening of Thursday, 8th of May, 1987. All 8 wore bulletproof vests, boiler suits, gloves, and balaclavas. All were armed. They didn't go straight to the gate. The digger drove past the station first. The van followed, doing the same. 2 slow passes. Members of the unit later told surviving comrades they had sensed something was wrong, that the station felt different, that the silence had the wrong quality. According to journalist Peter Taylor's account, corroborated by the subsequent ECHR judgment, a brief argument broke out in the van over whether to proceed. The decision was made to continue. Tony Gormley and Gerard O'Callaghan climbed from the van onto the digger alongside Arthur's. At approximately 7:15 in the evening, Arthur's drove toward the perimeter fence. In the front bucket, 300 to 400 pounds of explosive inside an oil drum, wired to two 40-second fuses. The fence was light construction. The digger went through it. The van pulled up a short distance ahead. Patrick Kelly jumped from the passenger seat and, followed by others, opened fire on the building. At that moment, the detonating cord along the fir trees fired, a fraction of a second before the SAS soldiers inside the station began shooting, creating the noise and confusion intended to draw the IRA team's attention outward at the critical moment. Then the fire from the station. Then from the hidden positions outside. M16s, G3 rifles, and the two GPMGs. The bomb in the digger's bucket detonated. The blast destroyed the digger and badly damaged the building. Both HMSU officers inside were injured, one with severe head injuries, the other with a broken nose. One SAS soldier sustained a facial injury from broken glass. 600 spent British cartridge cases were recovered from the scene. Some published accounts give other figures. The IRA's 8 recovered weapons produced 78 spent cases between them. The disproportion tells the story of the firefight with more precision than any narrative reconstruction can. All 8 IRA members died. All had multiple gunshot wounds. All had been shot in the head. Declan Arthurs was found in a laneway opposite the Loughgall Football Club premises, unarmed, holding a cigarette lighter in his right hand. The lighter he had been preparing to use on the digger's fuse. 3 of the 8 were shot at close range as they lay either dead or wounded on the ground. 3 members of the outlying scout cars escaped from the scene, passing through British Army and RUC checkpoints set up after the ambush was complete. The Ruger Security 6 revolver found on the site had been taken from Reserve Constable William Clemence's body at Ballygawley 18 months before. The last of the 8 was still on the ground when a white Citroën GS came along the road. Anthony Hughes and his brother Oliver were driving home. They had spent the evening repairing a lorry. They were wearing boiler suits because they worked in a trade, not as a disguise. Oliver, sitting in the passenger seat, had on blue coveralls, similar to those worn by the IRA unit. About 130 yards from the police station, soldiers opened fire on the car from behind. Anthony Hughes, who was driving, was killed. Oliver was shot 14 times. He survived. The car sustained approximately 34 bullet holes. A mother and her child, sheltered in the church hall, had the rear window of their car struck by a stray bullet, 250 yards from the station. Nobody in the village had been warned. No attempt had been made to seal off the approaches to the ambush zone, because sealing the zone would have alerted the IRA unit before it was fully committed. The soldiers who fired on the Citroën were in a kill zone, in darkness, immediately after a bomb had detonated, against a unit that had just opened fire on a police building. Anthony Hughes and his brother were in blue boiler suits, behind the van that was the target of the ambush, driving toward the station that had just been attacked. Anthony Hughes had no connection to the IRA. His family was subsequently compensated by the British government. A post-mortem was conducted at Craigavon Area Hospital on the 9th of May. Parliamentary questions about his death were raised in the House of Commons in December 1987. In March 2014, the Ministry of Defence issued a formal apology to the Hughes family, confirming that both Anthony and Oliver were wholly innocent of any wrongdoing. Nothing in that account minimises what happened to Anthony Hughes or explains it away. He drove into an ambush he knew nothing about, in a car that resembled the target vehicle, and he was killed. His death isn't a footnote to the operation. It's the moment that transformed a clean tactical outcome into a legal and moral wound that remains open. By 9 o'clock on the morning of May 9th, 1987, the facts as available were being processed publicly and privately on two parallel tracks. On the public track, UPI filed a wire report noting the SAS had been deployed as undercover agents to collect intelligence about the IRA. The BBC reported 8 IRA members killed and 1 civilian dead. The British government said very little. The Conservative government under Margaret Thatcher maintained the same silence that had governed all public acknowledgements of SAS operations in Northern Ireland since the late 1970s. Operation Judy was confirmed to exist. Its planning, its intelligence basis, its command authority, and its specific tactical decisions remained unaddressed. On the forensic track, the scene at Loughgall was worked methodically. The recovered weapons were logged and tested. Ballistic analysis eventually confirmed, through documents released from the National Archives of Ireland in 2017, that the weapons in the dead men's hands had been used in 40 to 50 killings, every IRA-attributed security force fatality in counties Fermanagh and Tyrone in 1987 before the 8th of May. The Director of Public Prosecutions for Northern Ireland reviewed the evidence and in September 1988 concluded that it didn't warrant the prosecution of any person involved in the shootings. The IRA released its own statement almost immediately. Survivors from the scout cars, the statement said, saw other volunteers being shot on the ground after being captured. The language was carefully chosen for a political audience. 3 of the 8 had, in fact, been shot at close range while lying on the ground. Whether they were dead, wounded, or surrendering at the moment of those shots is a question the subsequent inquest never fully resolved. RUC Chief Superintendent Harry Breen stood in front of television cameras the morning after the ambush and displayed the recovered weapons to journalists. He would be dead within 2 years. On the 20th of March 1989, he was shot dead in an IRA ambush near the Irish border, alongside RUC Superintendent Bob Buchanan. A 2013 Tribunal of Inquiry by Judge Peter Smithick found that Breen had been specifically targeted, in part to interrogate him about how the British security services had known about Loughgall in advance. The intelligence picture at Loughgall, it turned out, had done something beyond destroying a unit. It had announced a capability the IRA would spend years and lives trying to identify. The funerals were held in the Kappa and Galbally areas of County Tyrone. Thousands attended, the largest Republican funerals in Northern Ireland since those of the IRA hunger strikers of 1981. An Phoblacht, the Republican newspaper, ran extensive coverage on the 14th of May 1987. The 8 dead were described as volunteers and martyrs. The newspaper printed 4 separate tributes in one issue, to the operation itself, to Jim Liner individually, to the wider unit, to Tyrone in mourning. Gerry Adams gave a graveside oration. He chose not to use measured language. The British government, he said, understood it could buy off the government of the Republic, the Shoneen clan. But It does not understand the Jim Liners, the Padraig McKierneys, or the Seamus McIlwains. It thinks it can defeat them. It never will. The oration was quoted in full in Republican media and referenced in security assessments across Whitehall. The Conservative government's silence in response to the operation wasn't embarrassment. It was a calculation. Any public explanation of what Operation Judy had involved, how the intelligence was gathered, through what authority the tasking decision was made, under what rules of engagement the lethal force was authorised, would have required the government to answer questions it had spent years declining to answer in public. The silence was also in part legally protective. The less that was said officially, the less could be used in subsequent civil proceedings. The IRA began its internal search for the informer it believed had compromised the operation. Some accounts suggest the organisation eventually concluded that the informant, if one had existed inside the unit, had been killed in the ambush itself. The search was never definitively resolved. Some within the Republican movement believe to this day that the intelligence came not from a human source inside the unit, but from surveillance or intercepts at a higher level. The uncertainty served British intelligence purposes. An unresolved informant question divides and demoralises an organisation in ways a confirmed betrayal does not. On the 20th of August 1988, 15 months after Loughgall, the East Tyrone Brigade destroyed a British Army bus on the Kerr Road near Ballygawley, killing 8 soldiers returning from leave. The brigade killed 13 security force personnel in 1988. The year's death toll was, according to one academic study, indubitably in direct retaliation for security force success at Loughgall the previous year. The brigade had not been broken, it had been enraged. What the law subsequently made of Loughgall took years to develop and hasn't yet concluded. 6 families of IRA members and the family of Anthony Hughes commenced civil proceedings against the Ministry of Defence. Anthony Hughes's widow settled out of court in April 1991. In May 1995, a formal inquest ran for 4 days and returned a finding that all 9 people killed at Loughgall had died from serious and multiple gunshot wounds. Lawyers representing 6 of the IRA families withdrew from the inquest on the 2nd day because the coroner declined to provide copies of witness statements. SAS soldiers didn't give evidence in person. Their statements were read aloud into the record. Their identities remained protected. The cases then moved to Strasbourg. The Loughgall specific application before the European Court of Human Rights was Kelly and others versus the United Kingdom, application number 30054/96. The judgment was delivered on the 4th of May 2001, alongside a group of related cases from Northern Ireland, Jordan versus UK, the McCurr case concerning a killing in 1982, and Shanahan versus UK, all decided on the same day. The court's finding in the Loughgall case requires precise statement because it has been frequently misstated. The court found that the United Kingdom violated Article 2 of the European Convention on Human Rights in its procedural dimension. That finding means the investigation conducted into the deaths was inadequate. It wasn't sufficiently independent, not sufficiently transparent, and didn't satisfy the procedural obligations that Article 2 places on member states when lethal force is used by agents of the state. The court didn't find that the killings were unlawful. It made no finding that the soldiers acted outside their legal authority or that the use of lethal force was unjustified as a matter of substance. It found that the investigation conducted afterwards was procedurally deficient. This distinction matters because it has been collapsed in a significant quantity of political commentary into a finding that was never made. The applicable finding from an independent body specifically constituted to review legacy killings, the PSNI's Historical Inquiries Team, which reached its conclusions in December 2011, was that the IRA team fired first, that they couldn't have been safely arrested given the threat they presented, and that the British Army was justified in opening fire. That finding hasn't been subsequently overturned. In September 2015, a new inquest was ordered. In September 2019, the presiding coroner was told the proceedings might run for 3 to 6 months once they began. In 2016, the BBC reported that police would need to examine nearly 10 million intelligence records for disclosure before the legal proceedings could advance. In October 2023, the Northern Ireland coroner stated publicly that there was not enough time for the inquest to be completed ahead of the Northern Ireland Troubles Legacy and Reconciliation Act 2023 coming into force. In September 2024, the Northern Ireland Court of Appeal, reference 2024 NICA 59, addressed multiple applicant families connected to Loughgall in the context of that legislation's legality. The inquest, 38 years after the event, remains unfinished. Phil Shiner is part of this story, but not in the way the name is sometimes used. Shiner was the founder of Public Interest Lawyers, a Birmingham firm that documented allegations against British forces, primarily in Iraq, not Northern Ireland. His firm pursued cases through the Iraq Historic Allegations Team and related mechanisms, and the pattern of retrospective investigation that his work helped establish was subsequently applied, through other organisations and other legal routes, to Operation Banner-era cases. In February 2017, the Solicitors' Disciplinary Tribunal struck Shiner off the roll of solicitors. It found him guilty of 22 charges of professional misconduct, including dishonesty and lack of integrity, proved to the criminal standard of beyond reasonable doubt. His firm closed on June 30th, 2017. He subsequently pleaded guilty to fraud charges. Shiner's removal from practice isn't the end of the legal pressure on veterans of the Northern Ireland conflict. It's one chapter in a continuing narrative. The Legacy Act of 2023 attempted to draw a line under cases of exactly this kind, offering a conditional immunity framework through the Independent Commission for Reconciliation and Information Recovery. The Northern Ireland Court of Appeal found significant provisions of that Act incompatible with the European Convention on Human Rights. The Secretary of State subsequently conceded on several of those grounds. The government has indicated its intention to amend the legislation. The soldiers who carried out Operation Judy at Loughgall have never been publicly named. Several have been the subjects of formal investigation. None has been publicly decorated for the operation. The government that directed them to Loughgall on the evening of the 8th of May 1987 has spent nearly 4 decades declining to describe what they were asked to do and why. The East Tyrone Brigade didn't collapse after Loughgall. Its immediate response was escalation. But its pattern of casualties after 1987 tells a different story than its operations do. Ed Maloney, in A Secret History of the IRA, recorded that the East Tyrone Brigade lost 53 members killed across the entire Troubles. 28 of those deaths occurred between 1987 and 1992, the 5 years after Loughgall. The brigade launched further attacks. It killed soldiers. It attacked police stations. It carried out the T-Bane bombing in January 1992, killing 8 Protestant workers. It remained capable. But it was no longer the brigade that had walked to Loughgall with a working playbook and an unbroken operational record. In June 1991, 3 more IRA members died in an SAS ambush at Cogue, County Tyrone. In March 1988, 3 further PIRA members were killed in Gibraltar in Operation Flavius, a separate event that belongs in its own analysis. The rural station attack doctrine, the specific methodology that Kelly and Liner had developed and the brigade had executed twice successfully, was never used again. No further occupied rural RUC station was attacked with a digger-borne bomb by a multi-vehicle unit after Loughgall. The doctrine had been watched, preempted and destroyed with the men who devised it. By 1989, according to the back-channel record assembled by Father Alec Reid, the Redemptorist priest who served as the key intermediary in contacts between the IRA leadership, the SDLP, and eventually the British government, the Republican movement had begun the conversations that would eventually become the peace process. The relationship between military attrition and political calculation isn't linear, and serious analysis does not flatten it into a clean narrative of one causing the other. What the back-channel record does show is that by 1989, within 2 years of Loughgall, the armed campaign's capacity to deliver strategic gains was being questioned inside the Republican leadership at the highest levels. Loughgall was the most visible single event in that reassessment, though it wasn't the only one. 2 years after Loughgall, the conversations that would produce the Good Friday Agreement in April 1998 had already quietly begun. None of the 8 men in the wreckage on Ballygazy Road lived to see it. Neither did Anthony Hughes. At the doctrinal level, Operation Judy is referenced in academic and military literature as a case study in intelligence-driven counterinsurgency, precisely because of what it demonstrates about the relationship between collection and action. A United States military thesis in the DTIC database cites Operation Judy as an example of the TCG committee structure working successfully. The coordination of human intelligence, surveillance and tactical deployment into a single operational outcome with no prior warning and complete surprise. The ambush wasn't a reactive contact. It was a pre-positioned ambush on an anticipated target, built on weeks of intelligence development. The firefight itself was the final 30 seconds of an operation that had been running for months. That is what the doctrine teaches, and why the firefight is studied at all. Not as an example of tactical violence, but as the demonstration of what accurate intelligence preparation delivers. Eamon Collins left the Provisional IRA in 1987. He gave evidence in court proceedings against former comrades through the 1990s. Killing Rage, his memoir, was published by Granta in 1997 to considerable attention from both literary reviewers and from people who recognised names in it. He was still alive when the book appeared. He was found in a country lane outside Newry in January 1999. He had been abducted, bludgeoned and stabbed to death. No one was charged. The people most likely responsible for his death were members of the Republican network he had once helped to organise. The morning in Newry, where this account begins, the news, the 8 names, the slow arithmetic of what the intelligence penetration implied, was the moment Collins understood that Loughgall had changed the war permanently. Not because 8 IRA men had died in this war before, but because every decision those 8 men had made, the route, the vehicles, the timing, the target, the tactics that had worked twice before, had been mapped in advance and pre-positioned against. The brigade had been defeated not in the firefight, but in the weeks before the operation left the planning stage. That is the argument Loughgall proves. The firefight was the last few seconds of an operation that had already been decided. The intelligence architecture that produced the ambush was built over years by people whose names have never been published inside a command structure that the British government has never officially described in full. The men who carried it out have never been publicly honoured. Several have been formally investigated by the government they served for the act of carrying it out. The inquest, ordered in 2015, is still not complete. The Legacy Act, designed to end proceedings like it, has been found partially incompatible with human rights law by the court that governs it. The families on both sides of 8th May 1987 are still waiting for the British state to produce a full account of what it authorised, who it sent, and what it knew. 38 years is a long time not to find the courage to tell a story you own. So we'll tell it. If you found this account worthwhile, subscribe. There are more stories like this one.